Friday, the Arizona Coyotes traded their all-star to Montreal in a multiplayer deal.
If I had to guess, it probably means he's not going to go to the All-Star game.
What if I told you that there was an NHL player who was known as the worst in the league, yet somehow became an all-star MVP? From being a barely used enforcer to lifting the MVP trophy while fans chanted his name. John Scott's journey is truly one of the most unexpected in hockey history, and his story is honestly one of the most inspiring you'll find in sports. But how did a player who averaged less than 7 minutes of ice time per game manage to win the highest honor at the NHL Showcase event? And why did the league do everything in their power to try and stop him from even stepping on the ice? Well, to find out, we need to go back to the late 1980s. John Scott grew up in a blue-collar family where hockey was everything, but unlike most future NHL players, he wasn't exactly a child prodigy on the ice. Standing at just 5 feet 9 inches as a freshman in high school, Scott was often overlooked by coaches and scouts. But then, something unexpected happened. A massive growth spurt hit, and by his senior year, he towered at 6 feet 8 inches. This sudden change in size made him awkward on skates at first. Nothing like the smooth skating stars who'd been training with elite programs since childhood. While future NHL stars were getting drafted into major junior leagues and receiving professional coaching, Scott instead chose to play college hockey at Michigan Tech, studying mechanical engineering as his backup plan. He wasn't drafted by any NHL team and wasn't even considered a professional prospect. But what Scott lacked in natural skating ability, he made up for with something else. An absolute fearlessness when it came to protecting his teammates, a quality that would eventually open an unexpected door to the NHL. By 2006, John Scott had managed to sign as an undrafted free agent with the Minnesota Wild organization, but this was just the start of his struggles. Teams saw Scott as nothing more than a human deterrent, a player whose only job was to intimidate opponents and drop the gloves when necessary. His first NHL coach was brutally honest, pulling him aside to say, "Look, you're not here to score goals or make fancy plays. You're here because you're 6 feet 8 inches and can throw punches. Don't try to be something you're not." Scott would spend the next 2 years bouncing between the NHL and the minor leagues, often sitting in the press box as a healthy scratch for weeks at a time. When he did get to play, he'd be lucky to see 4 minutes of ice time. The hockey media wasn't any kinder. One prominent analyst described him as a player with hands of stone and the skating ability of a shopping cart with a wobbly wheel. Despite these harsh assessments, Scott refused to feel sorry for himself, choosing instead to embrace his role as the team enforcer with a surprising amount of humor and self-awareness. During his stint with the Chicago Blackhawks, Scott would stay on the ice an hour after every practice, working on basic skating drills alongside players 10 years younger than him. His teammates noticed this dedication. Here was a player who knew exactly what everyone thought of his abilities, yet showed up every day with a smile on his face, ready to put in the work and stand up for his teammates when called upon. As Scott's career continued, he became known for one thing: being an enforcer, the guy who fights to protect his teammates. While most players were valued for their speed, shooting, or playmaking, Scott was only kept around to make opponents think twice before targeting star players. During a game against the Vancouver Canucks in 2012, a defining moment happened when Scott immediately jumped in to defend his teammate after a dirty hit, taking on 3 Canucks players at once. This incident cemented Scott's reputation as one of the most feared fighters in the league. The numbers tell the story. In one season with Buffalo, Scott racked up 305 penalty minutes while scoring exactly 0 goals. In fact, throughout his entire 8-year NHL career, he would score just 5 goals total, a number that many top players might get in a single good week. His fighting role meant that on game nights, when there wasn't an opposing tough guy to match up against, Scott would often be scratched from the lineup completely, yet his teammates valued his presence enormously. Buffalo Sabres goalie Ryan Miller once said, "Having John in our locker room changed how teams played against us. We could all play a little bigger, a little braver, knowing that if anyone took liberties with us, they'd have to answer to him." This was perfectly demonstrated during a heated game against Boston when notorious agitator Brad Marchand had been targeting Buffalo's smaller players all night. Scott simply skated by the Boston bench, said something quietly to Marchand, and suddenly the targeting stopped completely. Scott never had to throw a punch. His reputation alone was enough to protect his entire team. But something unexpected started happening during Scott's time with the San Jose Sharks in 2014. Despite barely getting 5 minutes of ice time per game, fans began to cheer wildly whenever he stepped onto the ice. When Scott would simply touch the puck, something that didn't happen often, the arena would erupt with excitement, drowning out even the announcer. After he scored a rare goal against Washington, the San Jose crowd gave him a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. As one Sharks fan put it, "John Scott is the only player who makes me feel like I could maybe, possibly, in some alternate universe, play in the NHL too. He's terrible at hockey by NHL standards, but he keeps showing up and giving everything he's got." What management saw as a liability, fans saw as the ultimate underdog, a regular guy living the dream against all odds. Scott's willingness to poke fun at himself won hearts too. When asked about his offensive skills in an interview, he laughed and said, "My go-to move is to close my eyes and shoot as hard as I can. Sometimes I fall down afterward." His teammates revealed that despite his intimidating on-ice persona, Scott was actually the biggest prankster in the locker room. He once filled every single one of his teammates' gloves with shaving cream before a morning practice. Even as Scott was traded from team to team, 5 different clubs in his final 3 seasons, he developed fan followings everywhere he went. Kids would wait after games specifically for his autograph, and Scott never rushed these moments, taking time to chat with young fans when stars often hurried past. This genuine connection with regular hockey fans would later prove crucial when the NHL announced a new fan voting system for the 2016 All-Star Game, a system no one expected would center around the league's most unlikely player. Then in November 2015, something amazing happened. What started as a joke on a hockey podcast quickly turned into an internet movement that nobody saw coming. 2 writers suggested that fans should vote for John Scott, now with the Arizona Coyotes, as a funny way to rebel against the NHL's boring all-star format. Fans from across the league, not just Coyote supporters, began flooding the online voting system. Hockey forums, Reddit threads, and Twitter accounts all shared the same message: vote for John Scott. The voting numbers were shocking. Within 2 weeks, Scott had jumped to first place with over 500,000 votes, more than Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin, and Patrick Kane combined. What had begun as a small prank had become a full-blown fan revolution against the corporate polish of the modern NHL. Even celebrities joined in, with hockey fans like actor William Shatner and musician Alice Cooper publicly supporting the campaign. The NHL had created a simple system. The top vote-getters would be named team captains for the All-Star Game, no exceptions. As the voting deadline approached, Scott's lead only grew larger, reaching nearly 1 million votes. Regular fans saw this as their chance to prove they still had a voice in a sport that increasingly catered to big markets and highlight reel stars. The NHL executives were not happy. They had designed the All-Star Game to showcase skilled superstars and marketable personalities, not a fighter who averaged less than 1 goal per season. Soon, Scott received a call from an NHL representative saying, "Do you think this is good for your kids? Do you think this is good for the game?" The league then tried multiple tactics to get Scott to withdraw, first suggesting he'd be embarrassed on the ice, then implying his children would be ashamed of him for participating. They hoped that Scott would voluntarily step aside, saving them from the embarrassment of having an enforcer at their showcase event. But they didn't count on Scott's unexpected courage to stand up for himself and the fans who supported him. When private pressure didn't work, the NHL got desperate. In a move that shocked everyone, Arizona suddenly traded Scott to the Montreal Canadiens, who immediately sent him down to their minor league team in Newfoundland, technically making him ineligible for the All-Star Game since he was no longer an NHL player. Sports media erupted in outrage. ESPN's Scott Van Pelt called it one of the most cowardly things I've seen in sports. While hockey analysts openly accused the league of orchestrating the trade specifically to block Scott, the backlash grew so intense that even people who didn't watch hockey were taking Scott's side. A father of 2 young daughters with twins on the way, Scott was suddenly shipped across the continent, away from his pregnant wife, all because fans liked him too much. The NHL had transformed him from a joke candidate into something much more powerful, an underdog symbol that everyone could root for. While fighting the NHL, Scott was also dealing with a family situation that few knew about. His wife Danielle was 9 months pregnant with twins, making the sudden trade and move to Newfoundland particularly cruel. Their family had already relocated multiple times for John's career, following him from team to team, and they had 2 young daughters under the age of 4. Scott had to leave his heavily pregnant wife to report to his new minor league team, knowing she could go into labor at any moment while he was 2,000 miles away. As Scott later wrote in his powerful Players Tribune article, "I'm not the only one with a family. I'm not the only one who's been traded before, but I am the only one who was traded because of a fan vote for the All-Star game, and that's what I can't accept. This isn't about a fun weekend or a silly vote or the state of my career anymore. This is about my family, my daughters, who had been excited to watch their dad play in the All-Star game. The stress was taking a physical toll too. Scott couldn't sleep, lost his appetite, and found himself checking his phone constantly for news about his wife. These personal challenges made the NHL's actions seem even more heartless, turning what should have been a highlight of his career into a nightmare for his family. Despite all the pressure, Scott decided to accept his All-Star captaincy if the NHL would allow it. When asked why, he simply said, "I'm doing this for the fans who voted for me, and I'm doing this for my daughters. I want them to see that their dad stood up for himself when others tried to take something away that he earned fairly." Support came from unexpected places, like when superstar Alex Ovechkin publicly stated, "John earned this spot fair and square." The fans voted for him. Let the man play. Even more surprising was when former enforcer turned analyst Jeremy Roenick, who had initially mocked Scott's selection, changed his position saying, "What the league did to this man and his family is disgraceful. I was wrong about Scott. He deserves to be there." The hockey world was divided, with players, fans, and most media outlets supporting Scott, while team executives and league officials quietly hoped the controversy would just go away. Online, the hashtag number #LetScottPlay started trending, and fans threatened to boycott the All-Star game entirely if the NHL barred him from participating. The pressure mounted so intensely that NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman finally issued a statement that Scott would indeed be allowed to captain the Pacific Division team, despite no longer playing for a team in that division. As the All-Star weekend in Nashville approached, what had started as a joke had transformed into the most anticipated All-Star appearance in NHL history. Nobody, not even Scott himself, knew exactly what would happen when he finally stepped onto the ice among the game's elite players. When Scott arrived at Nashville's Bridgestone Arena for All-Star Weekend, the reception was unlike anything ever seen for a player of his caliber. Fans lined up outside his hotel just to catch a glimpse, many wearing hastily made Scott jerseys with his number 28. Other All-Stars like PK Subban and Brent Burns showed their support by immediately approaching Scott in the locker room, making him feel welcome while giving him playful jabs about being the captain. Meanwhile, NHL executives avoided eye contact and kept their distance, a stark contrast to how they fawned over other stars. During the player introductions, Scott received the loudest cheer of the night, drowning out even hometown favorite Predators players. Then came the skills competition, where Scott surprised everyone by clocking 95.9 miles per hour in the hardest shot contest, faster than skilled players like Taylor Hall and Daniel Sedin. When it was announced, the crowd responded with a standing ovation, showing that this goon had more skill than most had given him credit for. Most telling was how the other All-Stars, the very elite players the NHL wanted to showcase, began gravitating towards Scott, taking selfies with him and including him in their jokes. By the end of the skills night, it was clear. Regardless of what the league thought, John Scott had been fully accepted by the best players in the world. Then came the moment of truth, the All-Star game itself. When Scott first stepped onto the ice, wearing his Pacific Division All-Star jersey, the crowd erupted in MVP chants before he even touched the puck. Then just 6 minutes into the game, the unexpected happened. Scott received a perfect pass from Brent Burns, broke in alone, and fired the puck past Nashville goalie Pekka Rinne for a goal. The crowd went wild, chanting, John Scott, as his teammates mobbed him in celebration. Even normally stoic players couldn't contain their excitement, with Joe Pavelski jumping up and down like a kid. But Scott wasn't done yet. Later in the game, he picked up a loose puck, deked past defenseman John Klingberg, and scored his second goal of the tournament, proving to everyone that while he might not be an all-star talent, he definitely belonged on that ice. The cherry on top came when Scott, the gentle giant enforcer, playfully dropped the gloves in a fake fight with Chicago's Patrick Kane, the league's leading scorer and a player Scott had genuine bad blood with in the past. Instead of throwing punches, they hugged it out, perfectly capturing how this unlikely story had brought everyone together. When the final buzzer sounded, Scott's Pacific Division team had won the tournament and the $1 million prize. The crowd began chanting, MVP, MVP. And when former hockey great Wayne Gretzky announced Scott as the most valuable player, Scott stood in disbelief, shaking his head, as his teammates lifted him onto their shoulders. In his speech, Scott simply said, "I just want to thank the fans. You guys definitely made this weekend special for me." This is definitely something I'll never forget. The NHL executives, who had tried to keep Scott out of the game, were now forced to hand him the MVP trophy and car keys in front of millions of viewers, their tight smiles barely concealing their discomfort. Headlines across North America the next day read variations of "NHL's plan backfires as Scott steals the show," "An enforcer gets last laugh." Fans online celebrated with thousands of memes and tributes, while even casual sports viewers found themselves touched by the ultimate underdog story. Perhaps most meaningful was a quiet moment caught on camera after the ceremony. Scott sitting alone in the locker room, FaceTiming with his family, tears in his eyes as his daughters waved excitedly at their dad, the All-Star MVP. The NHL had tried everything to prevent this moment, but in the end, they had accidentally created one of the most genuine, heartwarming stories in hockey history. The story of John Scott isn't just about hockey, it's about how regular people can sometimes win against powerful systems that are stacked against them. Someone once labeled the worst player in the NHL had proven that authenticity and perseverance can resonate more deeply than corporate polish and marketing plans. While Scott would go on to retire shortly after the All-Star game, never playing another NHL game, the impact of those few days in Nashville changed how fans view the relationship between players, leagues, and fans themselves. The NHL quickly changed the All-Star voting rules the following year, adding a clause that players must be on an NHL roster to qualify, a rule now commonly known as the John Scott Rule. But they couldn't erase what happened. Several enforcer-type players have since received better treatment, with teams and broadcasts recognizing their human stories beyond just their fighting statistics. As Scott later reflected in his autobiography, "For one weekend, I wasn't the goon, the enforcer, or the guy who couldn't skate. I was just a hockey player living out the dream we all have as kids on frozen ponds, scoring goals while the crowd chants your name." The crazy thing is, none of it happens if the NHL had just let me play in the first place, instead of trying to force me out. Sometimes, the best stories are the ones nobody plans. So what do you think? Was John Scott's All-Star MVP the greatest underdog story in hockey history? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. We're getting really close to our 10K subscriber milestone, and with your help, we can hit that target. Please subscribe to support us and motivate us to keep bringing you these amazing hockey stories. Check out our other videos by clicking on the screen now.